Guys, and welcome to How to FRQ, Miss Roper. So you have been writing FRQs for a little bit now in the unit. I've had you do some discussion posts and just writing in your journal and or just typing on a document online. Um, and the reason for that is because we're going to be writing a lot of FRQs. FRQs on the AP Bio test, the way it works is it is going to be 50% of the score for your AP Bio test. So some of you will be really stellar at MCQ and some of you will be really stellar at FRQ. Some of you might be stellar at both and some of you might want help in both. But either way, a lot of students rely on one or the other. They're really MCQ strong or really FRQ strong. And my goal is always to make you really FRQ strong because there's endless answers for that, whereas the MCQ, right, the answer is on the page. You just have to pick the right one. So with that being said, with FRQs, we are going to approach it from a logical standpoint as much as possible because FRQs could ask you any information. On your AP Bio test, you're going to have FRQs, you're going to have six. You're going to have six FRQs. Typically on an exam here, I'm going to give you one or two every time just for time sake for me grading as well as you taking the test. So with that being said, you're going to have about 1 to 2 FRQs every unit, but you're going to have FRQs throughout the unit. We're going to practice these a lot, and the only way to get better at them truly is to practice them. If you never practice them, you're not going to get better. So make sure you take all of those seriously, that you put away all distractions, that you stick to the time limits. If I put a time limit on there, it's only to help make you better. So the FRQs in this class are different from like an English class or a history class. They're very short, typically. You're going to have 4 short FRQs and 2 long FRQs. The long FRQ should take you no more than 20 minutes, and the short FRQ should take you no more than 10, depending on the FRQ. As we can see today, this FRQ is going to be 8 minutes to answer, and it's going to be worth 4 points. So that means there's 4 check marks that we're trying to get here, and we're going to have about 8 minutes to answer it. Again, on an actual test, that's kind of what the constraints are going to be. So when I assign you an FRQ on a test, I'll put a time limit on there, and it's probably going to be a shorter time limit. It really shouldn't take you that long. You guys in here for your test, for the most part, are going to be typing your answers, but just keep in mind you will be writing your answers on the actual AP test because it's a hybrid test. So that's why throughout the units, I'll have you just write some in your journals and either submit the picture, or I might not have you submit the picture, but it's just good practice because we need to keep up that writing speed. So with that being said, you've already viewed the How to FRQ document or PowerPoint. And so you should understand the kind of overall structure. So again, you're going to have 6. The first 2 are graphing and data heavy. One of them will give you a graph. One of them you'll have to graph. That's why we did all the practicing at the beginning of this unit for graphing. And we will continue to graph practice throughout the year. So the reason why you get so much time for what I would deem is kind of little information is because of things like this. The AP Bio test is going to give you a lot of manipulatives, a lot of figures, a lot of data, a lot of diagrams and pictures, and a lot of paragraphs to read. It is a heavy test when it comes to reading, surprisingly, right? Because you're reading about data, you're reading about information, and then they really want to know that you can interpret that data and that information. So if I started the 8-minute timer, I'm not actually going to start one here because we're going through it and really breaking it down on how to write one of these. Scientists are studying the structure and function of receptor X, a single polypeptide protein that is found in the membrane around certain types of cells. Receptor X contains no alpha helices or beta sheets. A specific molecule outside the cell is recognized and bound by receptor X. The binding of the molecule to receptor X causes the cell to have a particular response. To study the structure and function of receptor X, the scientists are altering the sequence of small sections of the receptor, both in the normal sequence of the 5 amino acid section of receptor X and an altered sequence that contains 2 amino acids are shown in the figure. Okay, so here is our figure. This was a lot of information. You're like, you just read a lot of things, Ms. Roper, and I did not retain any of them. That's my guess. And that's going to happen a lot. Like, that's just a human thing. I do that all the time too. So my suggestion to you is actually to go down to the question, kind of read at least the first part and the second part to kind of see what you're doing. Because a lot of the times in the shorter FRQs, it's going to be parts A through D. Typically, usually all the short FRQs are worth about 4 points. So with that being said, parts 1 and part 2, or part A and part B, sorry, typically recall questions. They're just like, do you remember this random part of AP Bio? And I say random, it's usually a much broader idea. It's not too specific. And then when we get to parts C and D, those are usually more specific to the manipulative or scenario that they gave you. Okay, this is not always true, but these are just patterns that you might start to notice when you look at FRQs. So I like to look at part A first because sometimes you can read that without having to read this whole blurb. So for example, identify the process used to form covalent peptide bonds that join amino acids into polypeptides. So it's asking me identify how we form peptide bonds. And so how you answer these, how you would type it out as well as write it out, because you are ultimately going to be writing your answers. So how you write it out is you would write A and then do a little parenthesis. Now, what I will say is the AP graders will read everything you write. You do not have to organize it, but an organized FRQ is a happy grader, and a happy grader is easier to give you points, right? They obviously can't give you the points if they're not there. It's not like I'm a nice grader, so let me give me the points. No, obviously the answer still has to be there. But if it's easier to find the answer, they're more likely to be able to give you the answer, right? If your writing is so disorganized and I can't read it very well, I can't find what I'm looking for at all because of the disorganization, you might not get the point even if your answer was there because they couldn't find it in your writing. So always label it by the part. Okay. So part A, identify. If you see the word identify, right? Identify. Well, that's not thick at all. There you go. Identify. These bolded words here, those are going to be where you get your points. So those are the 4 points right there. So identify the process. If you see identify, that is a 1-sentence answer. This is science. I don't care how eloquent you are with your writing. I don't care about the transitions and all these things. Obviously, you should be able to just write in clear English, right? But it doesn't need to be beautiful. It just needs to tell me the facts. And the less you ramble, honestly, the better, because it makes me grade them faster, but also it helps your grader as well. So if you see identify, that should be a 1-sentence answer. Most of these shorter FRQs should be no longer than like 4 to 6 sentences. And so when I put those sentences maximum on there, that's because I'm kind of telling you how much you should be writing. When you look at the AP rubrics, you'll see that there's not a lot to that. There's not a lot in the answer keys. It's usually like a bullet point or two. So they're expecting you to only write 1 to 2 sentences per part. Okay, so we're in part A, identify the process. So how I would write that, I have to move my screen down, sorry, is I like to do it in complete sentences to make sure I've answered it, but the process used to form the covalent peptide bonds is, and you know this, you learned it this unit. It's a lot of big words, I know, but how do we make bonds? Make versus break. We're going to make bonds, right? Our options are dehydration synthesis or hydrolysis, hydrolysis, hydro, water, lysis means to break, dehydration synthesis, dehydrate, lose water, synthesis means to make. So if I'm making or forming bonds, that's going to be, oh, that was my eraser, my bad. Dehydration synthesis. And obviously, if I was actually answering this FRQ in real time, right, that sentence would have taken me maybe 30 seconds. Because I only have 8 minutes to answer this, right? So you don't lose points for putting things down. So always, you should be answering every part to every question if you have time. If we were in a traditional classroom, I would not let you turn it in until the timer was up. So make sure you're using all your time unless you've already answered all parts fully. Okay. So part B. The change in the amino acid sequence illustrated in figure 1 caused a change to the shape of receptor X. Based on the R groups of the original and substituted amino acid, explain why receptor X has changed shape. So if I look up here, right, I'm looking, I need an explanation. So my answer is going to be explain. When you see the word explain, that can be about 1 to 2 sentences typically. It's not asking for 3 to 4 to 5 sentences. Typically, an explanation can be done in 1 to 2 sentences. I just say 2 because sometimes if it's 1 sentence, it's maybe like a big compound sentence, right? It should be about a 2-sentence thought. So I'm asking, explain why receptor X changed shape. Well, as I can see here are my R groups down here, right? And if you're hearing me say that and you're like, what is an R group? What does she mean? You need to go back and study your protein structure. You really do. That's very, very important. Go back and watch those videos of a protein structure. So we have our different R groups down here. Okay. Actually, I'll highlight them. And as you can see with the different R groups, those are the same, those are the same. These two are different. These two are different, and those are the same. So I'm looking at these two right here, right? I have a CH3 versus CH2, CH2, C, and then I have that carboxyl group with that negative right there, and then I have a positive right here. So these both have charges, whereas these do not. So explain why receptor X changed shape. Well, if I look at A versus B, A is going to definitely have, it has charged R groups versus this one has no charge. And because of this, a charged R group is going to be a polar R group. Oh, close. And then no charge is going to be non-polar. And again, if that is something you did not recognize, this is a lot of information. This is AP Bio. It's a very high level course. I totally understand that. You need to go back, maybe refresh on proteins from chapter 5. Go back at your textbook and look at that. Maybe rewatch the AP Bio videos. So I'm explaining why receptor X has changed shape. It has changed shape because the R groups are different, making the primary structure and the following structures different. The R groups are now nonpolar versus polar. Okay, and that's a perfectly fine explanation. I would have gotten the point for that one. Okay, use the template below that represents the 4 levels of protein structure. Place an X on each of the following that is expected. Yes. Okay. So here's more writing right here. This is the second part to the FRQ. I just put the template, as you can see right here. So you use template above for part C. Typically, I'm not going to ask you a lot of these types of questions because AP Classroom isn't super friendly with that kind of manipulative, but I will give you practice questions like this because the AP test will. Most often than not, one of your 4 questions is going to have you manipulate something. So it's going to give you a picture or a template, something to put something on. So we're still going to practice this. So we're going to use that template on the other side. Use the template below that represents the 4 levels of protein structure. Place an X on each level that is expected to be altered as a result of amino acid substitution. Okay, so the big thing here is when I go back, this part, like I said, if you skipped that, you do always need to go back and read it because sometimes it has answers in it. And I'll tell you right now, the answer to part C, a detail is needed in this information. So when I go back and look at it, I can see that, where is it? I'm just going to have to reread it. Scientists are saying the structure and function, single polypeptide protein found in the membrane. So right here, receptor X has no alpha helices or beta sheets. So because it has no alpha helices or beta sheets, that is the secondary structure there. So that one is not going to be affected because despite my change, I don't have any alpha helices or beta sheets anyway, so I'm not going to see that secondary structure change. So using the template represents 4 levels, place an X on each level that is expected to be altered as a result. So obviously the primary structure was altered because I changed R groups, I changed amino acids. However, I do not have alpha sheets or beta helices, so secondary structure is not changed. But my tertiary structure is going to change because I went from those polar to non-polar. I'm not going to make as many interactions, as many van der Waals interactions or disulfide bonds potentially, or whatever might be there, right? And because of that, my quaternary structure is also going to be changed most likely, okay? However, the secondary one is not changed. And if you would have put an X on secondary, you would have not gotten the point. Because here with FRQs and AP Bio, there's no half points, okay? You have the point or you don't. It's this or that. There's no leeway. It's just the facts. It's not reading an English paper and interpreting something differently. You wrote it down or you didn't write it down. And the frustrating part, and I understand that, is sometimes we think we wrote something down. We think we explained something well enough and we didn't. Most often than not, the number one thing I see people lose points on an FRQ is they think they explained something and they didn't, or they used the wrong word and they tell me, well, you know what I meant. I'm like, no, I know the common misconception. That's not what you wrote down, or that's what you wrote down was the common misconception, not what the information actually is. So you have to be very intentional with the words you're choosing to write down because sometimes it might not get you the point. Okay. And then part D, explain how amino acid substitution shown in figure 1 is most likely to affect the function of receptor X. So how does it affect the function? Well, shape equals function, okay? So with proteins, if the shape or primary structure of the protein is altered, it most likely will not be able to perform its original function. This is due to proteins having a specific shape for their function. And you could give an example if you wanted to, if that helps. Like some people on this one I see often write like, give me the example of like, for example, an enzyme is a protein that fits into an active site. And if it's changed its shape, it won't fit in that active site anymore. And that's fine. It's not bad necessarily to keep writing. I'm just saying I know some of you. Even if you don't think I do, I know some of you, and some of you will write till the end of time because you think the more you wrote, the more likely it is that you'll get the point. And that is not always the case, okay? Because if you contradict yourself at all, they go with whatever the last thing you wrote was. So I'm just saying, as the person grading it, as well as a previous grader, the less you write to get your point across, the better. Obviously, be more specific. Obviously, be very intentional. But you do not need to write me an essay. And that's what I'm getting at. You have in the actual test 90 minutes to answer 6 FRQ questions. 20 minutes for one, 20 minutes for the other, and 10 minutes for the following 4. That's about 80 minutes with a 10-minute, wiggle room. That's a lot. So I'm not asking for 8 essays. I'm asking for like 8 paragraphs. So realistically speaking, if I put all this together, and my handwriting's kind of big when I write on my iPad, that's about, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences that I wrote, and then I messed with the manipulative. Every, part, A, B, C, and D, unless it has multiple numbers in it, right? Every bolded word should be about 1 to 2 sentences, 1 to 3 sentences, depending on what the word is. If it's an identify, which you'll see identify a lot, that is 1 sentence. That is 1 sentence every time. It does not need an explanation. It's just saying identify. That gets you 1 point for identifying it correctly. So that's what I'm saying. If you don't know, just put something down. Maybe it's right. You don't know. Okay. Explanations or justifications are typically 2 sentences. And like I said, it's just a 2-sentence thought. Obviously, it could be 1 compound sentence. Obviously, it could be 3 sentences if you're a rambler like I am sometimes. But really, it shouldn't be too terribly long is what I'm getting at. You're not writing me 8 essays. So that's how we do an FRQ. Like I said, I know they look very daunting. I know that time constraint seems like a bit tight. And it's going to feel that way in the beginning, but the more practice you do, the quicker you're going to get at it. I will release some practice FRQs too on AP Classroom to help you study. I might not necessarily grade all of them because that's a very quick turnaround for me to grade it before you take your test potentially, but just to get you exposure to seeing more questions is what that's going to be. So I'll open those up as well, but I will not necessarily be able to give you feedback on them. It's just to expose you to more questions before you take your test. Other than that, that's how you do an FRQ. Make sure that you did go and grade those FRQs because grading them helps you understand how to write them more. Some people in that other one did ramble on way too long and should have not answered nearly as much. That is an older FRQ if you already went and did it. It's from 2009, which crazy. Oh my god, that was like 15 years ago. That's wild to me. But I know it's from 2009, so I know it's super old, but I wanted to give you an FRQ that you would actually understand the answer to, and that's really the most recent one that's been over Unit 1 information solely. So there's other ones there's a lot that have been over Unit 1, but they bring in other units to them as well. And so that's the only one that's purely from Unit 1 that I like. So go ahead and do that practice if you have not already, but if you have, awesome. If you have any questions about FRQs, feel free to shoot me an email. Like I said, I'll release them on AP Classroom for practice. I'm not necessarily going to be able to give you feedback because you have to take your test this week. But we've been doing them this whole time. You wrote one on water in the discussion post. You had one that was just handwritten in your journal about micromolecules, all those good things. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.